I mean, a transgender woman isn't any type of woman. A transgender woman is a man who says he's a woman. So he can say he's a woman all he likes, and I support his right to do so, but he's still a man. If it isn't your biology that makes you a woman, what is it? Well, the next thing it probably is stereotypes. So if a man is performing woman-y stereotypes, does that make him a woman?
If you go to prison, you may find there's a transgender woman there in the change rooms with you.
Or in your cell. So if you put any man, even one man who says he's a woman, in women's jails, you are with some predictability putting a man who is stronger than women, more violent than women, and far more likely to commit sex crimes, and the victims are women. We used to think that it was a huge human rights abuse to sterilise people, and now we're sterilising children.
And you're saying we're worse?
You're much worse. You're doing it to many more people, you're still doing it, you're doing it younger.
What has happened in my own country that has made us so complacent and so willing to turn a blind eye to things that are really going to bite us? Well, we have another conversation with Helen Joyce, an amazingly plucky and thoughtful person. She was the Britain editor at The Economist, where she worked for over 15 years, before she joined the gender-critical campaign group Sex Matters as Director of Advocacy. She's the author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. And the last time Helen and I spoke, it was about the Cass report in England. The reality for we Australians is that common sense has prevailed in the UK much more sensibly than it has here on some of these very difficult issues where I'm afraid many of our legislators in this country are frankly simply not living in the real world. So, Helen, thank you very much again for your time.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me back on.
And it's fantastic to have an Irish lilt here in Sydney.
Well, I was born that way.
It's not artificial. It's not put on.
No, I really am Irish.
The real you. Tell us about the charity Sex Matters. You're Director of Advocacy there. Who are you? What do you do?
So it's a quite new charity. It's only been a charity for less than 2 years. It was only founded less than 5 years ago. And it started as a human rights campaign group, now charity, focusing on the human rights that require you to acknowledge the reality of sex. So you can't think about things like privacy, right to a family life, freedom from inhuman or degrading treatment. If you look through the human rights framework, you will see that many of them require you to recognise who is what sex. You know, a woman can't have safety and dignity in certain situations unless she can tell men to keep out. The right to a family life requires you to know about the reality of sex. There's actually much more about the reality of sex in the human rights framework than you think at first glance. And when you look into it, you realise that we've gone very badly off track by thinking that it is something to do with human rights, that we pretend that people can be whatever sex they say they are. In fact, you need to take into account the reality of sex in order to protect everybody's rights. So that's what we do.
In a sense, it's about safe spaces for women who may, for very legitimate reasons, be quite vulnerable and need safe spaces because of the appalling behaviour of some men. And we have the Tickle versus Giggle case here, which I'm sure you've had put before you many times. Yes. And in effect, that was meant to be a fun space for women, but also a safe space for women. And suddenly now it can be invaded by a transgender woman in the same way now that if you go to prison, you may find there's a transgender woman there in the change rooms with you.
Or in your cell.
Or in your cell, and that has actually happened, of course.
Yeah.
We are talking about very serious matters here. I find myself wondering about the naivety of many women who are defending this idea that trans women are not men, when in reality they are placing other women at danger.
Oh, so many things to unpack there, and part of it is, of course, the language. I mean, a transgender woman isn't any type of woman. A transgender woman is a man who says he's a woman. So he can say he's a woman all he likes, and I support his right to do so, but he's still a man. And if you are going to have any space that has only women in it, you can't let any men in. That's a very obvious, logical statement. So straight away you can see the issue. Like, the man is entitled to say he's a woman if he wants. He's not entitled to come into women-only spaces. And it's not just about safe spaces, you know. People want single-sex spaces, both men and women do, for reasons other than safety. There's also just privacy and dignity and indeed freedom of association, which is another human right. But yes, the most severe issues are in places where women are at risk. So obviously women in prison, because they can't get away. And there's the blindingly obvious fact that the people in prison are criminals. And the pattern of criminal behaviour by men and women is quite different. Very few women are in prison, and most of them have experienced much more severe crimes than they committed themselves. Most women in prison have been the victims of serious crime, mostly at the hands of men. In most countries, it's about 20 times as many men are in prison as women, and the crimes are much more violent, and in particular, men commit nearly all sexual crimes. So if you put any man, even one man who says he's a woman, in women's jails, you are with some predictability putting a man who is stronger than women, more violent than women, and far more likely to commit sex crimes, and the victims are women. This seems very obvious, and I thought as soon as I pointed it out to people, they would go, I didn't think about that. It turned out that's not what they say. They say things like, oh, you're saying all trans women are rapists. I'm not. That's a logical fallacy. I'm saying that if you let men say they're women and then get moved into women's prisons, who's going to say that? The men who want to mess with the system, you know, the men who want to get access to women, you're going to end up moving rapists into women's prisons. So you ask a good question about why is it women who seem to support this more than men? And I've pondered that a lot, and I think part of it is just a bit, you know, it's not actually true. It's that men have the luxury of not having an opinion on this, because it doesn't really affect men when women come into their spaces. So men can just go, oh, you know, this is just one of those things, it flies by, I don't have to pay attention. Women are forced to have an opinion on it because it's us who are affected. And then if you want to say all the things that I just said, you will get called unkind. And women are meant to be kind. Women police each other on their kindness. Women like virtue signalling, including in front of other women. And then, you know, some women genuinely are worried about a group they think is very vulnerable, namely men who identify as women, and they think like, you know, well, we've got our rights, let's give them their rights. And they don't think through the consequences for women's rights. You know, they're just trying to be kind to the next oppressed group. I don't think that's very logical. And then you have to notice that mostly it's not the sort of women who are going to end up in jail who are advocating for this. Very easy to advocate for poor trans women prisoners if you are not going to be the person who's locked up with them.
There's another somewhat offensive line in this, as I see it, and that is that I notice amongst a certain class of angry women today a great willingness to tar all men as somehow toxic, and a great willingness to point out that men can be perverts and behave appallingly. Why is it that suddenly a transgender woman is not? Can be, you know, you can defend the notion that some of them are not going to be out-and-out perverts with evil intent at mind. And a related issue for me is, quite frankly, I have daughters and granddaughters. I can't sit by as a man and contemplate that they may be confronted with a situation where they might be offered counselling because they're offended by the idea that a transgender male has come into their change room at netball.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we thinking?
I mean, again, it's very difficult to understand what's going through people's heads in these situations because it seems so blindingly obvious what you're saying. I think I have come to the conclusion that this viewpoint, the viewpoint that you are what you say you are, that if you're a man and you say you're a woman, you are a woman, is just part of a larger philosophy, and it's quite a new philosophy. It's almost a new religion, really, a godless religion, which sees people as masters of their own fate and creators of themselves. You know,
God over themselves, perhaps.
Yeah, and like that you create yourself, that you express your identity, and that identity cannot be wrong. It's the most innate thing about you. And within that worldview, the idea that somebody might be lying about their identity is hard to contemplate. So when a man says he's a woman, he's revealing a truth about himself, namely that he's a woman. And then he moves category in your mind when you're thinking about things like risks or oppression or whatever. So a woman who thinks like this, or a person who thinks like this, they often say, look, it's not trans women who hurt women, it's cis men. So cis is the word they use for not trans. You're like, well, From my point of view, trans women and cis men are in the same category. They're two types of men. Well, they're just the same type of men, to be honest. They just say different things about themselves. But if you believe this whole thing about identity is the most important thing, and your identity is something that you understand about yourself and other people have no role but to listen when you tell it to them, then you think they're two different groups of people. And you also think that somebody who's putting them in the same category is doing something that's deeply offensive. Indeed, that it's vilification, to use the words of laws that you have here in Australia, that to say of a man who says he's a woman that he's still a man is like using the N-word or something. It's just true.
So in the end, that's what the transgender movement is ultimately all about. It's radical individualism, total autonomy. My identity is who I am. You question my identity. You are saying I am a lesser human being, an evil person, that I should be cancelled, that I'm not worthy. It's a vilification.
Yes,
to question somebody's self-identity.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I often think everybody's born basically either small c conservative or small l liberal. Like we're all kind of lean one way or the other. And both of those worldviews have a lot going for them. And, a lot of them, they're both true in many ways. So, a small c conservative notices that we have a shared human nature, that we have to rub alongside each other in society, notices that children don't exactly pop out of the womb, full of the milk of human kindness. They do actually need to be taught to behave well, that we need guardrails in society, and that sometimes you have to not do what you want because other people matter too. And then a liberal will care less about tradition for tradition's sake, be more interested in innovation, pay more attention to rights like freedom of belief and freedom of expression, and be less concerned about, how much things impact upon other people if they're how you feel about yourself. And both of those things have a lot going for them. And the modern human rights framework is meant to be a synthesis of the two.
Yeah, I'd have to say, I think, though, that the reality about many modern liberals is that they don't really believe in freedom of expression.
No, I know. I'm talking about classic liberal here.
Yes, ideally.
Classic liberal.
It's a significant area because of the development of a view they seem to have, self-belief in the virtues of their own righteousness, that they'll basically shut you down,
so
silence you.
I think they're progressives rather than liberals.
Right, I see. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so a progressive is someone who believes in the arc of history, that, that we're constantly pressing forward and that the new is better than the old. And so they think that conservatives are just backward. Whereas a liberal is somebody who actually has committed, truly, to the understanding that there's a plurality of voices, that other people's rights matter too, and so on.
Useful. Yes.
So if you imagine that as the spectrum from conservative to liberal, and now you go right out, way past liberal, to the idea that everybody is just a self-made human being, and that you declare your identity, and that is automatically a good thing to do, and understanding your identity is like the highest good, you tell the world, and all the world can do is applaud. And I mean, it's not only that it's unbelievably arrogant and also just not correct. I mean, we don't have inner selves. We create ourselves in partnership with the society we live in. We rub along with other people. We learn and we teach and we partner. It's also that it's just not possible to live together with other people if all of you were doing that.
Well, you can't.
No, I mean, everybody.
If I'm God over my life, you're God over your life. What happens when you do something
exactly
that I think's evil, or I do something that you think's evil?
Yeah.
Well, you have to declare war on me because you're right. You're God. You can't possibly be wrong.
Yeah, and that's why you get this sort of very hyped up rhetoric where transgender activists often say things like, "You don't accept my right to exist. You want me to have to stay in my house and never, come into public." And I mean, I don't want that for anybody. Why would I want that? All I'm saying is, you are actually a man if you were born male. You say you're a woman, but I'm not going to say that because I too have freedom of speech and belief. But if you think that woman identity is your true self, and I'm denying that about somebody, I think that can feel like annihilation to them. And also, if they want to do things that only women are allowed to do, and I say they can't, then they feel they can't live in society. That if they're not allowed to use the women's spaces, that I'm saying they must stay home. I'm just saying, no, use gender neutral or go into the men's, because it's for you.
See, I would say they are, funnily enough, victims in a way of a zeitgeist that actually allows you to believe that you are who you identify as. It's actually simply not true.
Oh, exactly. I mean, there's lots of things I'd like to identify as. And whenever I say this, people think that I'm mocking this identity. Like, that the transgender identity is very real, but, it is a fact that my younger boy was a train from age 2 to 4. I mean, lots of little children have very vivid imaginations, but he really lived that role. Like, he called his clothes paint, called his hands the buffers. He'd walk around the house in lines. He'd run into the wall, and then he'd back up, and then he'd take a current. And it was so vivid for him, and it was incredibly sweet. Obviously, I didn't put him in the sidings at night, and I didn't feed him coal. We just played along when it was fun, but fed him boy food and put him to boy bed, And then around age 4, he gave it all up. And people think I'm mocking trans people by making this comparison, but I'm not, because it was very, very real to my child and very appropriate at his age. So people can identify as all sorts of things. But the fact is, you are what you are. You are a human being. I am female. You are male. I can be as unhappy about that as I like. I mean, I'm not, but I could be. It doesn't change it. But then there's a whole load of other things about my identity as well. I'm the oldest daughter of 9. I'm a married woman. I'm a mother. I'm a colleague. These are all things that are defined in relationship to other people. We're not human on our own. We're human in relation to other people. And it is like an attempt to turn yourself into a god, to say that you make yourself entirely out of nothing. And then, that other people have no job but to cheer, as opposed to say, well, bully for you, but I too have my own life. So, the famous saying, your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. Like, a man can say he's a woman, but the point at which he walks through that door marked F, he's swinging his fist. Yeah. My nose has begun, so please stay out.
There's an arrogance in it, I have to say.
There is. There's a narcissism.
Yeah. A selfishness.
Yeah.
If you were to say to me what lies at the heart of, a crisis in humanity, it's selfishness.
Yeah.
This is one of the extraordinary things about this sort of, I will be God over my life, I'll do it my way, I don't need anybody else in my life sort of approach that's quite common now. No man is an island. And someone had to make way for me when I was born. I'm very glad they did. I wasn't a Spartan put out to die because I was inconvenient. And I think there's a bit of a problem there too, that we get locked into this idea that we can be an island when in fact we weren't when we were brought into the world. Most of us won't be, and they are declining years either. Yeah. And who, if we're all going to be selfish, is ever going to look to the needs of others?
Yeah, and a lot of it is about denying the fact that we are animals, actually. And I mean, I was just thinking as you were speaking there, of course, every woman who's been pregnant has been very intimately entangled with another human being for the pregnancy and then for some time afterwards. And it's kind of inconvenient, and it feels, I mean, I loved it, but it is inconvenient. It also is a sort of reminder of radical interdependence that is very much not part of our zeitgeist. Like, we like to think that we are in charge of ourselves, and you can kind of pretend you are if you're a man, and as opposed to a woman. Like, women have to either be careful not to get pregnant or else deal with being pregnant. If you're a prime age man with good health, there's a period of 20 or 30 years when you can pretend that you're kind of basically a brain being carried around by a robot. But as a child, as an old person, as a woman pretty much of any age, and especially a woman who is having babies or, but that has little children, you realise you're not that. You're an animal. And you're an animal that's very entangled with other animals.
Yeah, I probably want to draw a bit of a distinction. I think a human being's very, very special and unique. But
it's still an animal. There's an animal nature to us. There's a physicality to us.
Yes.
We're certainly not brains in robots,
Yep.
is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yes, got it. And here's the rub. Somebody made the comment the other day, just particularly struck me, that when the archaeologists of the future dig us up, they won't be saying, well, this person was one of 57 genders.
Yes.
This was a male or this was a female.
So if you saw this story, this is a chap in Switzerland who said this, and he's been sentenced to 10 days in jail for vilification for saying that.
For making that comment?
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. It's regarded as insulting to the transgender community. And we're really in a bad place. We're using ordinary words about facts that are actually important for people is vilification. Sometimes people say, you just want to use the N-word. Like, as that's just a fact too.
They always carry it to extreme.
Yeah, but also that's an insulting word. Like, male and female and man and woman are just the ordinary words for the two sexes. And I mean, it's not a thing that it's not a thing that I can refuse to talk about. If we do, then by fiat, we allow men into women's sports, men into women's prisons, men into women's changing rooms. We lie to children. We put children on the path to sterility because we say that they can choose their sex. We do a lot of bad things when we lie about this particular topic. So we do have to talk about it, and the ordinary words are male and female. So, that can't be vilification. If you call doing that vilification, then you have absolutely stopped ordinary discourse about important things for humanity.
George Orwell made the acerbic comment that some things are so stupid only an intellectual would believe them.
I love that quote.
No person in the street would believe it for a moment. And now we have in Australia, and have had since the 1970s, a Sex Discrimination Act. The current Commissioner, Anna Cody, was asked a few days ago whether biological men could be women. And she said, "I don't understand the term biological men." Well, I could go to any pub in Australia and nobody'd have any trouble understanding the term biological man. And she said, and you made the comment that she's indoctrinated herself into extreme foolishness. Do you think she really believes this?
No, I mean, so I don't know her, so we're speculating here. But I've heard plenty of people make this sort of comment, so I'll speak more generally about people who make this sort of comment. Sometimes what they say is that this term biological man or biological woman is quite recent, and that's true, because we didn't need to say biological before. We knew what we meant when we said man and woman. We meant the biological categories. So that's really disingenuous saying that. And then mostly they do know perfectly well what you mean, but they know that it's risky to admit that. They know that you're straight away requiring them to say something that's going to get them shouted at, and possibly worse. So they're trying to sidestep it. She does, of course, know what we mean. I mean, I remember when I was writing my book, there were two gay men in England, two journalists who were talking to each other in a jokey way on social media, and they were talking about finding a surrogate. And one of them said to the other, what we need is some broody lesbians. And, they both of them subscribe to gender theory. So both of them believe that male people can be lesbians if they identify as women. So which sort of lesbians were they looking for? Were they looking for one of these male lesbians, or did they know which sort of lesbians they meant for a surrogate? So these men, my point is these men who would say, oh, a woman can have a penis. Oh, you can be assigned male at birth and still be a lesbian. That's not who they're looking for. They know perfectly well what a female is when they want to rent a woman's uterus to have a baby for them. So everybody has double consciousness on this. If they're saying things like they don't know what biological male is, they know. They know when they need to know.
It's a powerful insight, I have to say. I know a transgender woman who has been enormously courageous on this. And when asked to do things, for example, play a woman's sport, has just said, no, I'm not going to, because I know that biologically I'm not a woman.
Yeah.
Even though I identify as a woman, dress as one, I am addressed as a woman, and broadly, respected, and she's a person I have a lot of respect for. But people who are honest like that pay a terrible price.
Well, I think you get treated like an apostate or a heretic if you're somebody who they think should go along with the religion. Like if you're just somebody who's nothing to do with it, they leave you alone. They leave most men alone. So it's people that they want to join in the play, to use my analogy of putting on the play and everyone else has to clap. They're the people who get into trouble. So the people who get treated the worst are the detransitioners, people who used to identify as trans and now no longer do. Often people who.
But I didn't think they ever had any regrets, Helen, because I thought that fewer people complained about the procedures they'd been through than complain about failed knee operations.
Isn't it amazing how these memes make it around the world? I mean, I've heard that comparison too. Nobody's checking, John. Those gender clinics are not doing follow-ups.
The point you're making is that nobody know because nobody's gone out there and actually asked them.
So when we've looked anywhere that they've done some serious research, it's much higher than that. But also regret is an odd concept to be using here. It's not the concept we use for any other medical treatments. So just to back up a bit, what we're talking about here is people who don't just identify as trans. They're people who go through some medical pathway. So they will take hormone blockers, perhaps cross-sex hormones, and perhaps have some surgery to try to make their bodies look more like the opposite sex, and then later decide that that wasn't a great idea.
Yes.
So we don't decide on the efficacy of any other medical treatment on the basis of regret. We actually compare it with other treatment pathways or with doing nothing. So, for example, there are treatments that we now know mostly don't work. Things like surgery on your lower back or certain surgery, keyhole surgery on the knee for certain injuries. It's not because they've done lots of them and asked people, do they regret it? Because often people don't have anything to compare with. Like, they get better naturally, so they think that they are better and they put it down to the operation. You compare doing it to not doing it, and then you discover that actually it didn't work. It didn't do any good. So what's the point in regretting if you cut off body parts? You can't get them back. Most people, it's part of staying sane and staying happy as a human being. We readjust ourselves to what's happened to us, and we rewrite the way we think about the decisions we've made in order that we can live with ourselves. So it's most people who have done these things, even if it wasn't the wisest thing and it would have been better if they didn't do it, they'll say something like, well, I was in a very difficult place. That seemed like the right thing to do at the moment. I forgive myself for it. And I learned a lot from it. I've come out a stronger person. People say that sort of thing. And anyone who knows anything about medical research will know that's someone who shouldn't have had that operation. But they've got to move forward with the rest of their lives. So they won't tell you that they regret. So it's already the wrong concept. But anyway, even when you use that concept of regret, you're certainly talking about 10% and up in anywhere that has looked at it. And also, we haven't waited very long to find out.
No.
If you had these things done as a teenager or in your early 20s, many women don't realise they want children until their mid to late 30s. Men maybe later. So, we wait 20, 30, 40 years. What about when people start getting early onset dementia because of the hormones they took? In the 50s or 60s?
Well, exactly. I mean, if I would have thought high-quality medicine would mean explaining to somebody the potential consequences of what they were undertaking.
Yeah.
So very few teenage girls, I'm sure, for example, are really quietly worked through the implications that they're unlikely to be able to have children.
Yeah. So
if they undertake puberty blocker and other treatments. Yeah. And even if they did, they're too young to really understand how they might feel about it later in life.
Yep.
Many of them. And the other thing about it, I'd not realised this, but it's very likely they'll never know full sexual satisfaction.
Yes, so it all depends on what you take and when you start. But the fullest sort of treatment pathway, the treatment pathway that's offered, for example, by Michelle Telfer in Melbourne, is that a child, no matter how young, could be 2, 3, knows themselves. They come out of the womb knowing themselves. So a 2 or 3-year-old who tells you, God made a mistake with me, or, I'm really a little girl. I mean, the things I've read you would not believe. This isn't a quote from Michelle Telfer. It's from a gender clinician in America. When she gave a talk, and she was filmed giving it, in which she said that babies, pre-verbal babies, know their gender identity. And she said that a little baby boy could unpop the fasteners on his onesie to make a skirt to illustrate to people that he was really a girl. And the little baby girl could pull a barrette, a clip out of her hair, to indicate that she was really a boy before they could speak. These people are extremists. So anyway, that's the start of it. You've got this tiny child who tells you, the adult, adults are very stupid and children are very wise in this way of thinking about humanity. The child reveals their true self to the idiot parents. The parents, gasp with delight at the revelation of their child's gender identity, and then they socially transition them. They tell everybody else that this male child is really female, or vice versa. Puberty approaches, and puberty is going to tell the truth to everybody. So you're going to have to block puberty. You give this powerful drug that just knocks out the gonads, the testes and the ovaries, which would normally send signals to the brain that go back in this feedback loop that push you through puberty. And puberty changes everything about your body and brain. It's what turns you from being a child into an adult. Everything about your processing of the world, your independence, your appetite for risk. Boys grow hair, you get bigger, more muscly. But also, in that time is when you start to get sexual feelings. And it's when your gonads, your testes, your ovaries start to become mature. So if you stop that early, that will never happen. And the idea originally was that you could give a child puberty blockers to get them to a bit older so they could make a decision about whether to continue. But you can see the problem here, which is that you've stunted the child's mental development. So they just stay frozen as quite childish. And in fact, what happens is that 97% of children put on puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. So they're not a pause. They're not time to think. You're just on the conveyor belt. So now you take your cross-sex hormones. Probably by 18, 19, 20, we're not sure exactly when, it's too late for you to go back and allow your own body hormones to re-kick and restart your own puberty. It's over. So you won't be just infertile, you will be sterile. Because it's now not possible for your gonads to do the right thing for your sex. But anyway, by this point it's kind of moot because they've probably done surgery on you and taken them out anyway. Girls aren't healthy when they're on testosterone. It's very bad for female reproductive organs. They atrophy, they cramp, they become extremely painful. Most girls and women who've been on testosterone for just a few years end up having to have a hysterectomy for the pain. Nobody's telling a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, a 4-year-old this when they socially transition, and yet with some regularity that's where it ends. So that child has given up, healthy mental and physical development, a full knowledge of their own sexuality, full sexual function, and the chance to have biological children. And that decision could not possibly have been explained to a young child who can't possibly understand what they're giving up. And nobody would even try it. It'd be very strange to talk to a 4 or 5-year-old about orgasms or something, Totally inappropriate. It just shouldn't be done.
Oh, I don't know. We live in a country where all sorts of sexual depravity is put in front of children.
I get accused of caring about children's orgasms for saying all of this. I'm the one who's saying protect children's potentiality to grow into full adults. And then people say, gosh, you're obsessed with children's genitals.
That's sick.
It is sick. Some of these people are really sick. We used to think that it was a huge human rights abuse to sterilise people. And now we're sterilising children.
That's pretty staggering when you put it like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I wrote my book, when I realised that this was happening. And I will add one thing to this, which is that there's significant evidence that people who grow up gay are more gender non-conforming in early youth. Absolutely not like, 1 for 1. It's not a 100% correspondence, but it is a statistical link there. So this is happening more to people who would have otherwise grown up gay than to people who would otherwise have grown up straight. So we're not just sterilising children, we're sterilising gay children, or children who will grow up gay. I'm starting to think this is looking very ugly.
I've always been deeply troubled by the insistence that the only approach that clinicians, medical staff, teachers, and above all parents should take when their child suggests that they may be feeling that they're living in the wrong body is the so-called affirmation model. We talked about this before.
Yes.
I've always been very concerned about this line that the only appropriate way to deal with a child, no matter their age, if they think they might be trapped in the wrong body, is to affirm them in it, not to encourage the child to think it through, not to work it through with them, certainly not to remonstrate and say, no, come on, get on with it, which is what would have happened in my age. Get over it, get real. That might have been inappropriate, but seriously, where's the justification come from for the affirmation model? Because I understand, and I'm absolutely staggered by this, the Premier of Victoria, Jacinta Allen, she's passionately and dogmatically insisted that transgender kids are 15 times more likely to commit suicide. I think you responded pretty strongly. You said that was false and dangerous. Mm-hmm. I have my own views on it, but I'd like to hear yours first.
So where does this thing come from that you have to affirm them? I think it comes from thinking that children are born wise and that adults are basically foolish and need to learn from their children. I've heard many parents of trans kids, especially in America, say...
So we get less wise as we grow up.
Yeah. The world ruins us, or we're very backward because we're older. Like, older people are backward. The next generation is just wiser than us, and so on. So the parents will say things like, I learned so much from my little trans guy, what they're talking about is a 4-year-old girl. Like, I learned nothing from my children except, to be patient, to have self-control, to be an adult. They weren't teaching me that. The rigours of being a parent taught me that. I mean, children are there to learn from us. We're supposed to know what we're doing, and we're supposed to impart our values to them. So it's a radically different worldview for a start. So that's why they think the child is super wise, and the child is like, they even talk like, they say things like trans kids are sacred. Like, all children are sacred in a way. Do I think now that it would be the right thing to do to say, pull yourself together? I don't, because you have to remember when you're speaking to a child today, what that child is hearing from school and from the media and from social media. You can't talk to them the way that you might have 50 years ago, because they think that you're cruel because they've got all this around them. So you've got to do a lot more than that if this happens to you. But so there's kind of two viewpoints here. There's the viewpoint of the people inside the gender clinic that, you know, everybody has a gender identity. They know their gender identity. It's our job to affirm it. And then there's the mostly sane people outside the gender clinics who are not going to go along with that unless you give them a reason. And now I described a treatment pathway that leads to significant physical and mental harm and to sterility. There is only one circumstance in which we would do a treatment for a child that leads to those harms, and that is that the child would die otherwise. So if you have a child with a fatal cancer, you would give them radiation treatment or chemotherapy, even if you knew that was going to sterilise them, because they're going to die otherwise. So the suicide narrative is essential to put the weight on the other side of the scales for you are going to seriously harm your child physically, mentally. So that's why they say it. And the evidence that they use was never any good. It's based on very poor quality online surveys that are not at all representative. There's a couple of them done, one in America that gets mined over and over again. There were no checks on where people were. You could fill it in as many times as you liked. It was advertised through trans networks that you were entered into a prize. The data quality was terrible. They know this because they've looked to see what people said they'd been treated on. And a very large number of people, in essence, said they had been on puberty blockers over the age of 18, which is never given. And then from that, they say that it's not actually suicide. It's attempted suicide or suicidality. Thinking about suicide is higher in that group. Since then, there have been some rigorous studies, one in Finland and one in the UK. And what they have found is that there are a lot of comorbidities for people who say they're trans as children. That means other conditions. So the kids who are seen in the gender clinics, the 2 gender clinics in Finland, are far more likely than other children to have had, family breakdown, to have been abused, to have ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, self-harm, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, all of these other things. And those increase the risk of suicidality. And when you control for those, the excess risk for trans identification is 0.
That's what I understood to be the case.
Yeah. So it is simply not true that having a trans identity makes it more likely that you will harm yourself or kill yourself. However, it's very dangerous to tell children that it is. Because one thing we do know about suicide and suicidality is they're contagious. So that's why, as a journalist, you're told the reporting guidelines are you don't give much detail when somebody has killed themselves. You certainly don't present this as the solution to a specific problem for that person. You don't talk about the methodology, and you don't suggest that the person was very brave to do it. Because people read that and, they're maybe in trouble in their lives, or they see some similarities between that person and themselves, and it makes it more likely they'll do it too. So it's highly irresponsible to say this.
What about, I'm reliably informed that this has been a standard line from some of these clinicians. They say to troubled parents, well, this might be concerning for you, but you have to make a choice. Do you want a child who undergoes this treatment, or do you want a dead child? Yeah,
they say dead daughter or alive son, or the other way around. Do you want a dead daughter or a live son? I mean, it's emotional blackmail, and it's to get the parents with the program. Yeah. And the worst thing is that some of them do that in front of the child. So now the parent has really got an absolutely impossible choice. The parent in front of the child has to act as if they don't care if the child kills themselves. I hesitate to use any other word, but it's wicked.
The point that I just wanted to add is I find it mind-boggling and totally unacceptable that a senior political leader in Australia can make as wild a statement as that without any supporting evidence of any quality anywhere.
She will have been told it's true. I mean, it is not right. It is not right that somebody makes a statement like that without really being sure of it. But one thing I will say, and this is true everywhere, not just in Australia, is that organisations that used to be reliable and that used to have good names have allowed themselves to be completely corrupted by this agenda. So in the UK, Stonewall is an example. Stonewall was a great organisation. It was set up to advocate for gay and lesbian people. It did fine work. And, it's still coasting on that reputation, even though 10 years ago it torched it by adding the T to the LGB. And it has misrepresented the law. It has pumped out fake statistics like this. It has treated any politician or journalist who has the slightest doubt about all of this as just beyond the pale, total bigots. But a lot of people haven't noticed. It takes a long time to notice when a brand destroys itself. So I don't know what your equivalent is here, but I bet you they're saying that this statistic is true, and I bet you there's a lot of people who still think that they're reliable and dependable, and who don't actually realise that they're believing something that long ago lost any reason to be believed.
If I was still the leader of a political party and I was going to trot something like that out,
You'd check.
I'd want it checked. It's a really far-reaching, almost unbelievable, because it is unbelievable, and dangerous thing to say.
And I mean, another thing about it is, suppose it was true. It is true for some other conditions. There are other mental health conditions that can really increase the risk of suicidality. I mean, we won't go into too many details, but you can imagine like serious eating disorders, for example. They cause a lot. No responsible clinician tells the child or says anything near the child about that. They emphasise recovery, resilience. Even if this was true, why would we be telling little children that they're doomed to consider suicide? Stonewall, back in the day when it was a good organisation, it had this wonderful campaign aimed at teenagers who were recognising that they were gay and were considering coming out and were experiencing homophobia. They got happy, healthy, gay adults to say to camera, "It gets better." That's what you should be saying. That's what any responsible adult should be saying to children who are struggling or unhappy. Hang in there, it gets better. Not, you're going to kill yourself.
Well, now we have the Australian Human Rights Commission. It has shortlisted Michelle Telfer, who's a director of gender medicine, and it's been very prominent on these issues at Melbourne's Children's Hospital, where you've seen an explosion in treatment, if that's the word, for children with dysphoria. And you've been highly critical of that nomination. I'd be interested in why.
Well, I mean, the treatment pathway that I described is a human rights abuse, and it will be recognised as that in the future. I think it'll be very like eugenics, which were regarded as very progressive. People who thought very highly of themselves and their ethics and morals, thought that they were helping to create a better humanity with the eugenics program. And the word was a word that, it made you sound good. And now we look back with horror and we recognise it as having been a human rights abuse. And the word is now a painful word to use, Well, it's going to be like that with affirmation. This is a human rights abuse. Doing this to children is a human rights abuse. I would say puberty. Going through normal puberty to adulthood is a human right. It's your right when you're born to be allowed to progress along the normal path of development. So she's committing a human rights abuse by what she does in her clinic. How come a human rights organisation is lauding her for this? And I think it's, and this is, before I was a journalist, I was a mathematician, and I spent 11 years between my first degree and the various, my PhD and my postdocs, long time to then change course, which I did. But that 11 years, if it taught me anything, it taught me that when you have a complex system, a complex interlinked system like mathematics, but also like laws, if you break it in one place, that error cascades through the whole system. And the break here is saying that it is a human right to identify your sex, rather than just a given. And from that error, propagating errors have come out right through the human rights framework, with the result that people who say they're defending human rights are actually acting against human rights. And that is why I think we see somebody whose job it is to stand up for human rights, praising somebody who's actually harming human rights. It's turned the organisation back to front, and now it's working in the opposite direction to the way it's meant to work.
So we have a Human Rights Commission that's working against human rights, and we have a Sex Discrimination Commissioner who says the sexes don't exist. So why does the commission exist?
I mean, I guess she would say, you know, women in all their diversity, or, you know, that's one of those code words. You know, women in all their diversity means and men. It means both types of humans, but the ones who say they're women. I can't get my head around it still, because, like, if it isn't your biology that makes you a woman, what is it? Well, the next thing it probably is stereotypes. So if a man is performing woman-y stereotypes, like, does that make him a woman? Well, what about a woman then who isn't performing woman-y stereotypes? You know, I have a PhD in mathematics. Does that make me not a woman, you know? Like, straight away you see the illogicality of it, but somehow they've got themselves lost in this upside down, back to front, circular sort of mess. And they think they're being, another code word, inclusive. Like, in this framework, it's always good to be inclusive. But definitions aren't inclusive. Definitions are about what's outside and what's inside the group. So yes, I mean, a women's commissioner, why would you have a women's commissioner at all if both sexes could be women? You'd just have a humans commissioner.
Now, it's still on Victoria. You will have noticed since you come to Australia that Victoria is very much the epicentre of a lot of these.
Yeah, so I gather.
Progressive issues where the community finds itself baffled by what's going on, because the community does. We now come to one that I find really offensive, and that is that the Victorian government has been enabling children to socially transition at school without their parents' involvement or knowledge.
Yeah.
What on earth do we make of this? This sort of concept that the school must work out whether, it's an oxymoron, isn't it? The child is a mature minor and can therefore make up his or her mind. And that can be done without the parents' knowledge. If the parents are likely to be troubled or difficult, the school should form that assessment. Is the child, the minor, of such maturity that they can make up their mind, and should make up their mind, independently of their parents and without their parents knowing?
I mean, it all starts from the foundational lie. Like, if it was really true that each of us had a little module inside us that was our true self, then at the moment at which you became mature enough to tell that, you would tell the world, and it would actually be right that all of us went along with it. So that foundational lie is the thing that makes all these people behave in this otherwise inexplicable way. I mean, I think it's nothing to do with it whether your parents agree or not. It's false. And other people have rights too. This is a sentence we say very often at Sex Matters. Other people have rights too. Say it's a boy. Say he's really a very mature 14, 15-year-old boy, and he genuinely does. You know, he genuinely is somebody that you would think has capacity to do stuff. And he says he's really a girl. He's known this for a long time about himself. I don't care. For two reasons. One is, he's not. And the other reason is, the girls need to be able to say he's a boy. Because if he's a girl, he's going to be playing girl sports. He's going to be using the girls' toilets and changing rooms. They have rights too. And if his parents are all in on it, I still don't care. Because the other children have rights too. We just shouldn't be doing this. I mean, it's an extra disgrace that they're not telling the parents about it, because who the hell do they think they are?
Exactly.
But they shouldn't be doing it at all. You cannot keep children safe if you lie about which children are what sex. Because keeping children safe requires being honest, and also sex is a risk factor. Like, girls can get pregnant, boys can get girls pregnant. If you put boys and girls together with some predictability, you will get pregnancies. Like, I can't believe I'm having to explain this to adults. And if you say the boy can go into the girls' spaces because he's a girl, then you're not doing proper risk assessment. You're not thinking about things like where you put children to sleep when you go away on school trips. You're being an idiot. And you're making yourself stupid and making yourself blind and looking away. We know some pretty bad things that have happened in the UK because of this, because it's happening there too.
This really is adults not doing adulting.
It's adults not doing adulting, exactly. And then what we've heard about, you know, when bad things do happen, the sorts of bad things you can imagine, and the girl wants to say, look, this bad thing happened because such and such is actually a boy, she's the one who's in trouble because she's the one who's misgendering him. Because this turns everything upside down.
Certainly does. I mean, for years, women understandably believed that in rape cases, the woman wasn't believed often enough.
Exactly. I mean, you know, all these slogans, one of the slogans is no is a complete sentence. When a woman says no, she just shouldn't have to give a reason why. Just no. N-O, full stop. But here we are saying, you say you're a woman. I can see you're not. So no. Suddenly that's bigoted. And the same people will then turn around and with a different bit of their brain will be saying, believe all women.
Yeah.
Which is another stupid slogan, by the way. I don't believe all of any group, but I'm just pointing out the contradiction.
To start to land this, you're here in Australia and you've seen enough now to be able to comment on what I think is quite noticeable. Your home country in Britain has moved a long way back towards common sense.
Yeah.
The courts, the politicians, brave people like J.K. Rowling.
Oh, yes, that's a huge part of it.
A huge courage of Hilary Cass, Dr. Hilary Cass, in her very objective work around the appalling practices that were happening in the clinics. It really wasn't medicine, was it?
No, but I mean, I should just say your clinics are worse. Much worse.
Worse.
Much worse.
Than Tavistock.
Oh, much, much, much worse. The Tavistock is actually quite conservative.
Our clinics are worse than Tavistock.
Far worse.
But what happened to Tavistock was ridiculous.
The only reason you know that is because it's in the NHS and the NHS is so publicly funded and there's so much oversight of it that it's a single system. There's much worse happening in your clinics.
The Kira Bell case, which kicked all of this off.
She was 18. She was 18 when she had a mastectomy. You've given mastectomies to younger kids than that. You give out a lot more puberty blockers. You're not tracking them. By international standards, the Tavistock was pretty conservative. The clinics in Canada and Australia and all over the US are much worse.
Well, it's worth remembering that Kira Bell, as a mature adult, appeared in court, as I understand it, and very clearly said that, and this is the point about improper medical practices, the consequences of what she was about to undertake were not properly explained to her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The things that came out in that hearing were remarkable. And
the Cass report absolutely confirmed the absolute inadequacy of the counselling, of the referring process, of the follow-up, of the examination of the actual results. And you're saying we're worse.
You're much worse. You're doing it to many more people. You're still doing it. You're doing it younger. You're not explaining any better. You've far less oversight. The thing is that the Tavistock got the global spotlight because of the way the NHS works, because it's entirely publicly funded, because of a few brave people like Kira. And I'm always amazed when I travel and people in places like Canada and the US say to me, oh, the Tavistock, that was a very bad clinic. And I'm like, no, it was pretty conservative.
When you can see that I'm genuinely amazed by that.
Oh, no, they're doing much worse here, I promise you. And they're still doing it.
Well, thank you for telling us. Thank you for being in a position to know. No,
we don't give puberty blockers in the UK at all anymore.
No,
they're unlawful.
Both sides of politics.
They're simply unlawful, including privately. You cannot get a prescription of puberty blockers in the UK for gender medicine. End of story.
And both sides of politics have agreed on this.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the Starmer government is not a Conservative government by any means.
So it came in under the Conservative government, and Wes Streeting, our health minister, continued it and said very, very clearly and actually extended it. So, we have banned puberty blockers.
Well, that's a profound note to end on. Not for the first time, I have to say, I wonder why. What has happened in my own country that has made us so complacent and so willing to turn a blind eye to things that are really going to bite us? Because I'm convinced that you're absolutely right. In due course, this will be seen as a human rights issue of the first order. I suspect that further down the road there will be a lot of litigation flying.
Yeah.
And one thing I am aware of is that there are thinking bureaucrats in this country who are starting to think, this is going to blow up. How do we get politicians to understand just what the legal implications of all of this are going to be down the road?
I mean, if I can offer a bit of advice, I would say don't try to give people everything in one go. Nobody changes their mind from being listed, 40 reasons. People change their minds themselves. So the two things that really do convince people that there's something going on here are, one, the harms of puberty blockers, and two, that the suicide statistics are false. And there are now very good papers, very solid work on both of those, and well written with good summaries. So I would go in on that. If you're talking to somebody, I would say, look, this is a dangerous treatment pathway. There was never any evidence for it. We now know that it's harmful and that most children do well who aren't on this pathway. And secondly, the statistics about the suicide is false. And then when those are internalised, people can start to think, why am I believing the people who told me those things in the first place? And off you go. But you know what? I'd put up with the rest if they'd stop doing this to the kids. We could slow down. We could take a breath and we could say, yes, it's bad what's happening in women's sports. Yes, it's bad what's happening to women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't feel this burning sense of urgency if it wasn't for the fact that they're doing this terrible thing to significant numbers of children, like right now. So that's the thing to fix first.
So just to encapsulate and add one final point, the affirmation model is based on a lie that your child is more likely to commit suicide if you don't try and counsel and work through with that child the issues they're confronting. Secondly, I think you said every child has a right to puberty.
Yeah.
To go through puberty.
To grow up.
When they will become the person who is able then to make serious decisions of this sort and to determine whether or not it's worth, for example, facing the prospect you'll never know sexual satisfaction or having a child.
Yeah.
And the third thing that I think you said that really jumped out at me is that when it comes to school children, it's not only parents that have rights and the children who are struggling themselves who have a right to puberty, but the other children.
We are a society.
Have rights as well to not have their daughters, for example, exposed to people who are capable of getting them pregnant.
Yeah. We are not islands.
We're not islands. No man is an island.
Yep.
Helen, your work is extraordinary. I'm very glad you're in Australia. I hope a lot of people hear the truth that what we're doing eclipses what Britain was doing, point one. Point two, that Britain, on politically non-partisan grounds, obviously with the support and backing of the courts and so forth, has resolved no more puberty blockers and early surgical intervention.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me on.